a carjack, an air hose, a block of dry ice. 6 people, 6 ordinary objects, and 6 deaths. Nobody in the room saw coming. We break down exactly what killed each one, and why the danger was already running before anybody noticed it. None of this is a how-to, and none of it is worth repeating. Names and some details have been changed. 1. The cutting took about 90 seconds when it went right, and it had gone right 9 times. Dale Wexler had the rest of it down to a routine, too. Park 2 streets over, walk in, lift it, 2 cuts, walk out. He was 37, and he thought of himself as good at this. On the night of May 14th, 2018, he was working a subdivision outside Springfield, Missouri. It was a little past 2 in the morning. It had rained for 3 days and quit around midnight, and the whole neighborhood smelled like wet mulch. A dog barked twice, 2 houses down, and gave up. Past the tree line, the interstate kept up a low, steady hiss. The car he picked was a compact hybrid sedan, parked in the side yard of a brick ranch house. Hybrids are the favorite target. Their converters do less work over the life of the car, so the metal inside stays cleaner and the scrap price runs higher. This one was sitting in the grass because the family had their driveway torn out for new concrete. To Wexler, that was luck. No motion light on that side, no neighbor's window facing it, and soft footing instead of gravel that crunches under a boot. The party wanted rides in the exhaust line and is about the size of a loaf of bread. Inside it is a ceramic honeycomb coated with rhodium, platinum, and palladium. Scrap buyers pay hundreds of dollars for those metals, and that is the entire reason he was out on that lawn at 2 in the morning. The trouble with a sedan is that it sits about 5 inches off the ground. You cannot work under one, you have to lift it. He had a cordless saw with a metal cutting blade, a headlamp with red film taped over the lens, and a scissor jack he had pulled out of a wrecked compact 2 years earlier. He set the jack behind the rear wheel on the passenger side and cranked the car up about 10 inches. Here is the thing every mechanic learns in his first week on the job. A jack lifts a car. A jack does not hold a car. Stands hold, stands go on hard level ground. And no part of a person goes under a vehicle that is standing on a jack alone. Wexler had broken that rule 9 times and gotten away with it 9 times on parking lots and driveways. Asphalt does not care how small your jack plate is. Soaked dirt cares about nothing else. The base of a scissor jack is a steel plate roughly 3 inches by 4. The rear corner of that car put about 750 pounds on it, spread across a plate that size. That comes to more than 60 pounds pressing on every square inch of ground. Lawn soil that has taken 3 days of rain holds about 5. The plate started sinking the moment he let go of the crank. It went a fraction of an inch at a time, and it did not look like anything at all. He spread a moving blanket on the grass and slid under on his back. Down there, the air smelled like cold mud and worms and old exhaust soot. Water came through his jacket at the shoulders inside a minute. The front cut took 20 seconds. Sparks came off the pipe in a short orange fan and died in the wet grass. Then he shifted his grip for the rear cut and pushed the blade upward into the pipe. That upward push matters. Every pound of force he put into that exhaust went straight back down through the car, into the jack, into the plate, into the mud. About 40 seconds into the second cut, the car moved. A quarter of an inch, no more. The jack made one flat tick, metal settling against metal. Every mechanic alive knows that sound, and knows the only correct answer to it, which is to get out. Wexler had maybe 15 seconds of cutting left and a buyer expecting him at 8 in the morning. He reset his elbow and leaned back into the blade. The plate cut deeper on one side, and the jack went off vertical. 4 degrees, maybe 5. A scissor jack carries a load only when that load runs straight down through its screw. Tilt it, and the screw stops carrying and starts folding. The car dipped toward his face and stopped, and for half a second nothing else happened. Then the arms went over sideways in one motion, with a sound like a wrench dropped on concrete. The rear suspension unloaded, and the whole back end came down as one weight. It fell 5 or 6 inches. It did not need to fall far. The sill came to rest across his chest, and the back of the car settled in behind it. His airway stayed clear the entire time. He simply could not use it. Breathing is mechanical work. The chest has to expand to pull air in, and his chest had several hundred pounds sitting on it, held steady. He was conscious for under a minute. Loss of consciousness came first, then cardiac arrest. His headlamp kept burning, throwing red light up at the floor pan. At 6:20, the homeowner came out with his coffee and saw a pair of work boots on the grass beside the rear tire. Deputies got there first, then a fire crew with lifting bags. There was nothing left to do but the paperwork. What stays with me is the moving blanket. He brought something along to keep himself comfortable, and nothing at all to keep himself alive. The second cut was nearly finished. Investigators found the blade 3/4 of the way through the pipe, a second or two of work from done. At the scrap rate that spring, the part he was cutting free would have brought him about $300. 2. Every man on that floor was afraid of the press. It was a 400-ton mechanical stamping press, and when it came down you felt it in your teeth. Light curtain, 2 fixed guards, and a hard rule that both hands stay on the buttons. In 19 years at Harlan Stamping, outside Kokomo, Indiana, Ray Colvin had seen that press take exactly 1 fingertip. The thing that ended his life cost about $11 and hung by the door on a coiled hose. It was a compressed air blowgun. The tip was worn shiny and the hose had a wrap of duct tape near the fitting. It had been on that wall longer than most of the crew had worked there. Friday, August 21st, 2015. August in a stamping plant is its own climate. Big fans push the hot air around without cooling anything, and the whole floor smells like cutting oil and hot steel. The shift ended at 3. Colvin was cleaning up early because his daughter's engagement dinner was at 6 and he wanted a shower first. He was 51. There was a photograph taped inside the lid of his toolbox, his daughter at her high school graduation curling at one corner. He also had a rule about his truck. No steel shavings in the cab, ever. New seats, and a wife who was tired of finding metal slivers in the laundry. There was a parts brush sitting in a coffee can by the sink, maybe 10 feet from where he stood. Nobody on that floor used it. The brush took a couple of minutes. The air took about 15 seconds. So at 2:40, he did what every man in that building had done at the end of every shift for 30 years. He pulled the blowgun down and started blowing the shavings off his clothes. Shop air in that plant ran at 120 pounds per square inch. That is not a hairdryer. That is enough pressure to drive a staple into pine. Skin is the only thing standing between that air and everything inside a person, and skin is thin. Any break in it is an open door. Colvin had a break in his. That morning he had dragged his left forearm across a burr on a fixture and opened a thin scratch, maybe an inch long. It had scabbed over by lunch, and he had not thought about it since. He ran the nozzle down his sleeves, then across his chest, then along his arms. Most of the shavings blew off in one pass. A few had worked into the hair on his left forearm and would not let go. So he brought the tip down onto the skin, pressed it there, and pulled the trigger. That is where the scratch was. He felt something he described to the man beside him as a bite. He jerked the nozzle away and shook his arm out. The skin around the scratch had swollen into a soft ridge the size of his palm. When he pressed it with his thumb, it crackled, the way a bag of chips crackles. That crackle was air trapped under the skin. It also meant the air had found a way in, and part of it had gone into a vein. Compressed air in a vein does not stay where it entered. It rides the blood back to the right side of the heart, and it gets there in seconds. The heart is a pump built to move liquid. Hand it a large slug of gas and it whips blood and air together into foam. Foam does not pump. The heart kept beating. All it had left to move was froth. Colvin turned toward Marty Sowell at the next station and started to say something about his arm. He got 4 words out. Then he put a hand flat on the bench because the floor had begun to tilt. His breathing went fast and shallow. The color left his face in a matter of seconds. He sat down hard on a wooden pallet, and that was the last thing he did on his own. He was unresponsive inside of a minute. The men on that floor did everything right and did it fast. Sowell had him flat on the concrete and compressions going before anybody found a phone. The plant defibrillator hung on the wall by the break room. It was on him in under 3 minutes, and it found no rhythm worth shocking. The ambulance needed 9 minutes to get through the gate and around the building. He was pronounced at the hospital in Kokomo at 3:34 that afternoon. The cause was an air embolism, which in plain words means a bubble of gas stopped his circulation. There is a federal safety rule written for exactly this. Compressed air used for cleaning has to be knocked down to 30 pounds per square inch. The nozzle also has to bleed off pressure if it gets pressed against something. Harlan Stamping had open blowguns on unregulated lines and had for decades. That is how these things sit, right up until the day they do not. Never point shop air at skin, not your own, not a co-worker's, not as a joke, not ever. The company pulled every blowgun in the plant that week and put regulators on the drops. Somebody bolted a hook where it used to hang and set a brush on it. The press is still there, still loud, still fenced, still feared. The men who work around it walk past that hook twice a shift, and the hook is what they look at. 3. The wedding was at 6, and Curtis Mahan had one errand left. It was supposed to be the easy one. He was 41, and in his family, he was the brother who handled things. His younger brother was getting married that evening outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. The reception needed 2 things Mahan had promised to bring: cold drinks and a fog effect for the first dance. Both came from the same place. On Saturday, November 16, 2019, a little after 4 in the afternoon, he pulled up to an ice house on the south side of town. He paid cash for 40 pounds of dry ice. 2 men loaded the blocks into an insulated shipping box and set it on the back seat of his sedan. His suit hung on a hanger above the rear door. In his shirt pocket was an index card with 3 lines of a toast written on it. The box had a lid. He laid it on top without latching it, because he would be unloading the whole thing in 40 minutes anyway. The man at the counter told him to keep a window down the whole way. Mahan cracked the passenger window about an inch on his way out of the lot. That counterman had just handed him the only thing that would have mattered. It was 38 degrees Fahrenheit that afternoon, with a wind coming out of the north. 10 minutes up the 2-lane highway, with the heater fighting that open window, he rolled it back up. Then he pressed the recirculation button, because a cabin warms faster when the system reuses its own air instead of pulling in cold from outside. It is the most ordinary decision a person can make in a car in November. Dry ice does not melt. It skips the liquid stage and goes straight to gas, and that gas is carbon dioxide. 1 pound makes roughly 8.5 cubic feet of it. Mahan had 40 pounds sitting 3 feet behind his head, under a loose lid, in a cabin he had just sealed and was actively heating. Warmth speeds the whole thing up. An insulated box is built to slow that down. Nothing stops it. Carbon dioxide runs about 1.5 times heavier than air, so it does not mix in and drift off. It settles into the low ground first, and inside a sedan, the low ground is the footwells and the space under the seats. That cabin held roughly 100 cubic feet of air. It did not take much gas to change it. If you take one thing out of this story, take this: dry ice rides with the windows down and the fresh air setting on. Or it does not ride with people at all. It is not smoke, and it is not a party novelty. There was cold rolling off the back seat, which made sense, because there was ice back there. There was a faint tick and hiss from the box. A thin white fog spilled over the edge of the seat and lay across the floor mats. That fog was only water in the air condensing in the cold. The gas itself has no color and no smell. It gives a person nothing to react to. The sun was going down behind him, and the radio was on low. It looked like the last quiet 20 minutes of a good day. Around the 12-minute mark, Mahan yawned. By 15, he had a headache sitting behind his eyes, and he was breathing faster than the drive called for. That is what a little over 4% carbon dioxide does to a person. He turned the fan up a notch. It was the worst move available to him, and he had no way of knowing that. A recirculation intake sits low, down by the driver's footwell. The fan was drawing from the heaviest, richest layer in the car. and pushing it up into his face. His hands felt heavy on the wheel. He rolled his shoulders, the way a man does when he decides he is only tired. Carbon dioxide does not simply crowd out oxygen either. It turns the blood acidic and dulls the brain directly, which is why almost nobody in this situation gets one clear thought about opening a door. A pickup ahead of him braked for a turn. He braked cleanly and correctly, and that small success told him he was fine. He thought about putting the window down. He talked himself out of it because he was cold, and because the turnoff for the church was only a few miles ahead. That was the last real choice he had. Somewhere past minute 19, his foot came off the gas. The sedan drifted right, crossed the shoulder, took down about 30 feet of wire fence, and rolled to a stop in a harvested field. The engine kept idling. There was no wreck to speak of. The car was barely marked, and nothing about that field said accident. A farmer saw his fence down at around 5:20 and walked out to it. He opened both doors, which was the right instinct, and probably kept this story from getting longer. Mahan was unresponsive. The medical examiner ruled the death asphyxiation from carbon dioxide. He was unconscious long before the car ever left the road, and his heart stopped sometime after that. The vehicle itself caused him no injuries at all. When the fire crew opened the rear door, the fog came over the sill and ran down the side of the car. The block had lost about 1.5 pounds on the drive, out of 40. That was all it took. The ceremony started at 6 without him. His brother was told a little after 7 in a side room. The music was still playing on the other side of the wall. The index card was still in Mahan's shirt pocket. 3 lines and nobody to read them. 4. The card in the box said to allow up to 3 hours for the full effect, and to keep the lamp well away from any other source of heat. Jesse Barlow read it once and dropped it on the counter with the wrapping paper. He was 24. The lamp was a birthday present from his sister, a reissue of the old 60s design. A tall glass bottle of clear liquid with a lump of red wax at the bottom and a chrome base. He had wanted one since he was a kid. There were people coming over Friday, and he wanted it running on the shelf by the television when they walked in. It was Tuesday, November 9th, 2004, in the rented half of a duplex on the east side of Dayton, Ohio. Rain was coming down hard enough to hear on the kitchen window. His roommate had gone in on second shift and would not be home until 11. Barlow ran the counter at a tire shop. Patience was not the thing people remembered about him. He plugged the lamp in a little after 7 and sat in front of it like it was a fireplace. He gave it 20 minutes, went and did something else, then came back and looked again. By 8:30, the wax was still one lump on the bottom, barely stirring. Nothing was wrong with it. A lava lamp is a slow machine on purpose. The wax has to come up to a narrow band of temperature where it turns just barely lighter than the liquid around it. Then it lifts, cools on the way up, and sinks back down. Too cool and it sits there in a heap. Too hot and the whole effect falls apart and the liquid clouds over. The base holds a 40-watt bulb, and that soft little bulb is the entire heating system the bottle was designed around. At about 10 minutes before 9, Barlow decided he could do better than a 40-watt bulb. He lifted the bottle off the base, carried it 4 steps, and set it on a burner of the gas range. The flame came up blue and threw a ring of light on the ceiling. He turned it to a little past medium, because low would have defeated the whole point. Then he stood there with his arms crossed, waiting for something to happen. A kitchen burner at that setting puts out something in the neighborhood of 2,000 watts. That is roughly 50 times the heat that lamp was built for, and it was going straight into the bottom of the glass instead of drifting gently into the air around it. Nothing sealed belongs on a burner, ever. Not a jar, not a can, not a bottle, no matter how solid it feels in your hand. And that bottle was sealed. It has to be, or the liquid inside would slowly evaporate and the lamp would die on a shelf. Sealed means no relief valve, no vent, no way out for anything that happens in there. When a liquid boils inside a closed container, it turns to vapor, and vapor takes up roughly 1,700 times the space the liquid did. The glass was the only thing standing in the way of that. The glass had a second problem of its own. The bottom was scorching while the top was still cool enough to hold. So one end of that bottle was trying to expand and the other end was not. Glass has no give in it. Barlow stood there a minute, went out to the living room, then came back. By then, the kitchen smelled like hot crayons and scorched metal, and the little window over the sink had fogged over. The wax had broken into strings and the liquid had gone milky. The glass was ticking. That sharp little sound thick glass makes when one part of it is far hotter than the rest. Then the bottle began knocking against the grate, small, hard taps that came faster and faster as the boil got going. Something inside slammed once, heavy, like a fist hitting a bag. It had been on the burner about 9 minutes. Barlow finally decided he had pushed it far enough. He put his left hand on the edge of the range and leaned across to reach the knob on the far side. His chest came to within about 1.5 feet of the bottle. There is usually a second of quiet before a container lets go, and this one had it. The knocking stopped. Then the glass failed low, down where it was hottest, and everything that bottle had been holding came out through the opening at once. One large fragment struck him in the chest. The injury was not survivable. He stayed on his feet for a second or two. Then he went down beside the range. The neighbor on the other side of the wall heard what she told police sounded like a dropped bowling ball. She knocked twice, got no answer, and called it in at 9:04. The medics came through the door 7 minutes later, and there was nothing left for them to do. His roommate got home at 11 to a street full of red lights and a strip of tape across his own front door. He had left for work that afternoon next to a healthy 24-year-old man who was impatient about a lamp. By 11 o'clock, the wax in that bottle would have been climbing on its own, red and slow, exactly the way the card in the box said it would. It had needed another hour. That was all it had ever needed. 5. His wife asked him to wait until Saturday. Her brother had a pole saw and a second ladder and could be there by 9. Wade Fowler told her it was a 20-minute job and went out to the garage. He was 58 years old. He had put a roof on that house, poured the pad for the shed, and pulled a truck engine in the driveway with a chain and a walnut tree. In 30 years on that property, he had never once paid a man to do a thing he believed he could do himself. And that was the whole trouble. A tree service over in Hopkinsville had quoted him $400 to take the limb down and haul it off. He had laughed at the number out loud in his own kitchen. It was Thursday, September 22nd, 2011, a little after 5 in the afternoon, on a farm road outside Cadiz, Kentucky. The sun was already behind the tree line and the yard had gone flat and gray. He wanted it done before supper. The problem was a silver maple limb that had cracked in an August storm and never finished falling. It hung out over the gravel where his wife parked, about 14 feet up and roughly 8 inches thick at the shoulder where it met the trunk. She watched him carry the ladder out and then went back to the stove. He set that ladder against the same limb he intended to cut, kicked the feet down into the gravel twice to settle them, and ran 100 feet of 12-gauge extension cord out the garage door. Then he carried up his circular saw. It was a worm drive model, the heavy kind framers use, about 15 pounds with a 7¼ inch blade. Down on a bench, that saw is a fine tool. It is built to be pushed through flat material that is supported from underneath, at about waist height, with both hands on it and the flat plate of its shoe riding on the work. None of those conditions exist 10 feet up a ladder with one hand hanging onto a rail. There was one more thing. The lower blade guard was tied back with a zip tie because it kept snagging on rough material, and he had gotten tired of fighting it. That guard is a spring-loaded cover that swings shut over the teeth the moment the blade leaves the cut. His was wired open. He had owned that saw since the early 90s, and it had never once given him trouble. Tools like that are patient. He climbed until his shoulders were about level with the limb, which put his boots a little under 10 feet off the gravel, and started the cut on the upper side. The saw sounded good for the first 10 seconds. The air went sweet with hot sap and sawdust, and pale chips came off in a stream and stuck to his sleeve. A limb that size sags along its whole length, and that one had been sagging since August. Cutting into the top of it let the sag do exactly what it wanted. The two faces of the cut leaned in toward each other, and the deeper he went, the harder they pressed on the blade. That is why nobody who works with trees takes a hanging limb from the top with a blade like that. You put a relief cut underneath first, or you use a pole saw, stand on the ground, and keep yourself out from under the thing entirely. About 2/3 of the way through, the ladder shifted an inch against the bark. He felt it, moved his weight, and kept cutting. The chips stopped coming off in strips and turned to fine dust. Then the sound changed. The clean high scream dropped into a strain, and the tool started to bind in his hands. He did what nearly everybody does, which is push a little harder. The cut closed on the blade and stopped it cold. The motor did not stop. That blade turned somewhere around 4,500 revolutions a minute, and all that force had nowhere left to go except back into the saw itself. So the saw walked backward out of its own cut, up and toward him, in less time than it takes to blink. It struck his forearm and rolled his wrist over. His right hand came off the ladder rail, because a hand that gets hit grabs at whatever hit it. His weight followed his hand. At that same moment, the limb rolled a few degrees in the open cut, and the top of the ladder was resting on that limb, so the ladder swept out sideways across the gravel. Both of them came down together, the man and the saw, 10 feet onto a gravel driveway. His hand never let go of the grip. That is a reflex, not a decision. The blade was still turning when he landed, and the guard that should have closed over it was zip-tied open. He came down on the saw. The injuries to his upper body were not survivable. His wife heard the ladder hit the gravel from inside the kitchen. She was out the door in seconds, and she stayed with him the whole time. The call went in at 5:12. That county runs one ambulance across a lot of open ground, and it was on another run 2 towns over. Volunteers from the fire department were there in 9 minutes, and the ambulance took 22. None of it made the slightest difference. This one was settled up on the ladder. In the second the wood closed on the blade, before anybody in that house knew there was anything to call about. 6. Unplugged means safe. Almost every one of us carries that rule around, and for nearly everything in a house it holds up. Pull the cord and the machine is dead metal. There is one ordinary appliance in most American kitchens where that rule is a lie. Owen Pike found the exception on a Sunday morning in July. It was July 10th, 2016, in a 2-car garage on the north side of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. 9:30, already 84 degrees, with a box fan in the doorway pushing warm air around. Somebody 2 doors down was running a mower, and the radio on the shelf was turned down low. Pike was 39. He was an estimator for a roofing company, and the kind of man who lays his tools out on a shop towel in the order he plans to use them. What he wanted that morning was the transformer out of a dead microwave. Those transformers are a favorite among people who build things because you can rewind one into a small welder for a fraction of what a welder costs. He had watched a 2-part video on how to do it and ordered heavy copper cable and a foot switch. It had been sitting on a shelf in that garage, unplugged since the end of March. He put on safety glasses. He took the outer cabinet off with a nut driver and set every screw into a magnetic tray. He photographed the wiring with his phone before he touched a single connector so he could put it all back later. He was not careless, and he was not showing off. He did 4 correct things in a row and 1 wrong one, and the wrong one was so ordinary that most people hearing this would have done exactly the same. At 9:40, he sent his brother a picture of the open cabinet. Then he set the phone face up on the bench, put his left hand flat on the metal frame to steady the machine, and reached in with his right. The bolts he wanted were down in a corner behind a bundle of wires. He had to turn his shoulder and come in at an angle, and he was watching the socket, not his knuckles. The back of his hand brushed the terminal on top of a black cylinder about the size of a soda can. That is the high-voltage capacitor. A capacitor is a small tank that holds electricity. A microwave needs far more voltage than the wall socket gives it, so it uses that tank to store and stack up charge, and a big one can sit at around 2,000 volts. Pulling the plug takes away the supply. It does not empty the tank. Most of these capacitors have a bleeder resistor built in, a deliberate slow leak that drains the charge in under a minute after shutdown. That safety feature is invisible from the outside, and it fails. When it fails, the tank stays full, and it will sit that way on a shelf for weeks. The other side of that circuit runs back to the metal frame of the machine. His left hand was flat on that frame, so the charge came out of the terminal, up his right arm, across his chest, and down his left arm into the steel. There was no warning at all. Nothing hummed first, nothing sparked, nothing gave him half a second to pull back. The sound was one hard crack, and nobody heard it over the mower. The garage filled with the smell of an electrical storm. While the charge was leaving that tank, his muscles had no say in anything, and every muscle the current reached locked at once. That is why people in this position cannot let go and cannot call out. His shoulder caught the shelf on the way down, and the magnetic tray went off the bench. He was on the concrete before the screws finished rolling. The amount of stored energy in that part is not large. That is not what decides these cases. What decides them is where the current travels and exactly when it arrives. And this one crossed the chest and landed in the wrong part of the heart's own cycle. The rhythm came apart. The muscles stopped squeezing and began to quiver, and a quivering heart moves no blood at all. That is ventricular fibrillation, and a heart in that state does not correct itself. He lost consciousness within seconds. Anybody who opens one of these should treat that capacitor as live no matter how long the unit has been unplugged. Short across both terminals with an insulated screwdriver, then short each terminal to the frame. Keep one hand in your pocket while you do it. And if that sentence sounded like a foreign language, leave the cover on. There's nothing inside a microwave worth this. His wife came out around 10:20 with a glass of iced tea for him. She started chest compressions and called for help at 10:24. The medics were there in 7 minutes with a defibrillator, which is the only thing that brings a heart back from that state. And by then, far too much time had gone by. An electrician who went through the machine afterward found the bleeder resistor open. It had not drained a thing since March. The screws were still lined up in the tray, and the transformer he had gone out there for was still bolted down, 3/4 of an inch of steel from being free. His brother had answered the photo at 10:03 with a joke about the mess on the bench. Nobody ever read it. The last message going the other way went out at 9:40. A picture of an open microwave cabinet, and 4 words, not even plugged in. 6 ordinary objects, and not one of them looked dangerous to the person holding it. So be honest down in the comments, which of these 6 have you already done a version of yourself? One of them gets owned up to far more than the other 5, and I have a guess which. Like and subscribe if you want the next set of cases.